Hi there, and welcome to another episode of The Pack Breakers, a show about tobacco harm reduction and the people of tobacco harm reduction. I am really honored and absolutely grateful that I have managed to call on and interview an icon, a legend in the tobacco harm reduction space. One of the bravest advocates in this space, and someone that has done so much for not just the community around vaping and providing the facts and the truth around why this particular approach to smoking cessation is so important. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce everybody to the absolutely wonderful Dr. Colin Mendelsohn. Hi, Dr. Colin.
Thank- Hi, Kurt. Good morning to you and good
Good,
afternoon to me.
good afternoon to you too, sir. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your most recent retirement. This is the third time. First two times I called
Yeah,
it that it's not going to happen, but I'm hoping this is it.
yeah. The first two just didn't take. It's this field is so addictive. It it just kept drawing me back, and I still get the temptation to go back because it's so interesting, and there's still so much to do. But this time it has to work. It's just time for me to move on.
Are you completely out, or are you just not going to take additional projects?
Yeah, look, I'm finishing off the projects that I had started before I retired. So I've got some presentations to give and some articles to finish that have been submitted for review. But I'm not taking on any new projects. This is an exception, Kurt.
I
It's
know.
my great pleasure to speak to you, but I'm not taking on anything else.
Well, thank you so much. I must be honest. When I was toying with the idea of a podcast, um, you were on the top five of people I have to interview. And when that announcement was made that, listen, you're now retiring, and I knew this was it, my heart dropped a bit, and I was still struggling with some technical stuff around the pack breakers. And I reached out to you, and you said yes, and I was just blown away. So thank you so much. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for those kind words.
So I think there is so much to cover here, but the one of the things that I really want to talk about is that there is so much confusion around vaping and its role and the harms and dangers. And being a medical doctor, a general practitioner that's been working on smoking cessation for decades, I mean, I think it's now 3 decades, correct?
Oh, longer. I've been really had a special interest in this since I started practice back in the early 1980s, actually.
Absolutely.
And I became more and more involved, and I've been very involved for well, at least 35 to 40 years and full time for the last 10 years or so.
So, as a medical doctor, I'd like to get that
Mm,
perspective in terms of
mm,
why is vaping and other harm reducing or harm risk
mm,
reducing products so important in this conversation. If, for example, a patient that walks through the door and is a heavy smoker or is a smoker that wants to quit,
mm,
that's failing to achieve that goal, like I did for 10 years,
mm.
what would you say to them? Because there's so much fear around vaping products and what it could do and what's been
Mm.
said out there. How would you approach it?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing to understand is that the traditional methods that we use to help people quit smoking are not very effective. I mean, we've been focused on those and then we go over and over them and we try and tweak them to make them a little bit better, but they have very low success rates. In the clinical trials, for example, of the best available pharmaceutical treatments, varenicline, Champix, and nicotine patches, in the Cochrane reviews, only 8 to 14% of people have quit smoking after 6 months. That's in the clinical trial with good behavioural care. After 4 years, in those high quality randomized controlled trials, only 6% of people are still abstinent. So 94% are still smoking. So it just doesn't work. It hasn't been working. And people have the experience that you've had, that most smokers in their 40s have tried on average about 30 times to quit. And some people can never quit. So I think we have to accept that the traditional methods just aren't good enough, and we have to look for other options. And tobacco harm reduction ticks all the boxes. I mean, the priority is to protect people from serious smoking-related disease. It's all about preventing cancer, heart disease, and lung disease. It's not about stopping nicotine. It's not about smashing the tobacco companies. It's not about stopping people from doing this. It's about saving lives. And we're left with the vast majority of smokers who continue to remain at high risk. And our responsibility as a doctor is that we have an ethical obligation to do the best possible thing we can to help the patient in front of us. Now, whether kids are using these products or there's some other problem in the public health is not to be ignored, but our priority is what's going to help this person in front of me. And if this person in front of me is going to keep smoking, in spite of all the things I've given them, and I've always usually tried everything, and other people have as well, then I think it's unethical to withhold tobacco harm reduction because it works for many people. It doesn't work for everyone, and it saves lives and protects people from serious repercussions. And I think doctors need to, as Professor Nancy Rigotti from Harvard University said in a major editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine recently, basically she said, look, we have enough evidence now. It's time for doctors to embrace this treatment and accept it as a mainstream part of medical care. And I entirely agree with her. She knows much more about this field than I do, but I respect her opinion, and I agree entirely that it's time now to accept that if our priority is to save lives, prevent lung cancer, heart disease, we can't ignore this treatment.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just part of a toolkit. I mean, I've taken the standing that it's I don't care how you quit smoking.
Yeah,
I just care that it's
yeah,
successful.
yeah,
And
exactly,
whether
exactly.
it be through a cold turkey approach, which is
Mhm.
completely unsuccessful, whether it
Yeah,
is
yeah.
through nicotine replacement therapies or through some kind of pharmaceutical aid, or
Mm,
even if it's
mm,
holding a pencil between your two fingers, like I've
mm,
heard before,
mm.
I don't really
Yeah,
care. But what I do care about is how we are so quick to demonize or flog off
mm,
a particular technique or method that
yeah,
is proving to be incredibly successful,
yeah,
purely because there is some kind of link or tie to an industry. And
yeah,
and I think that sometimes there's been a lot of scope creep in my view, yeah. And sometimes I just think it is not not made, yeah. So they'll only accept solutions that come from a
yeah,
certain quarter.
exactly.
So I
Yeah,
mean,
they've made a decision that they don't like vaping, and there's lots of reasons why people don't like vaping. One is they link it to the tobacco industry. Another is, as you say, we didn't think of that. Another is, well, the kids are doing it. Another is they're using a drug, and people should stop drugs completely. There's also
there we go. Sorry, Colin, your screen was freezing there. Um,
right.
so
Okay.
no, we're back again. So yeah, but for people that are smoking out there, if they come in, it's now become second hat. You know, people will speak to me and say, "Well, I'm not going to vape because of things like popcorn lung or lung
Mm,
damage or things like that."
mm,
And you
mm,
try your
mm,
very best to explain to them that, you know, these things are exaggerations. They're based
mm,
on no real evidence whatsoever. But obviously it is not coming from a trusted source. I'm a consumer
mm,
advocate. I mean, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a
mm,
doctor.
mm,
However, what
mm,
alarms me the most, and it's something that my wife, a pediatrician, debate about for some time now, is why there's such a disconnect in the medical society or medical
mm,
fraternity,
mm,
where you'll have some doctors like yourself that will advocate for these approaches and advocate for safer alternatives, because it's not just about quitting altogether, it's about providing a product that could reduce the significant harms that is associated with combustion. But then you get the other side that are completely against it. I mean, it's there's no, like, almost no middle ground. It's binary.
Mm. Mm.
What, if there was doctors out there, medical doctors that were happening to stumble across the pack breakers, what kind of advice or guidance would you give them in terms of doing their own research? And I mean, you touched on the
Mm.
ethical point of view, but I sometimes think that they've been fed a certain narrative and they take it as that's it. Are there
Mm.
other
Yeah.
areas that these people should be looking into that could best serve their own curiosity and their knowledge, as well as give them the correct information, or more information, not correct, the more
Yeah.
information to make better informed choices that they can impart with their
Yeah.
patients?
Look, you're absolutely right. People are being fed, health professionals and the general public are being fed a diet of misinformation and disinformation. I mean, if you read the media, you could be forgiven for thinking that vaping was, a public health menace. That's what we're told in Australia. That's that's addicting a new generation of children. That's been developed by the tobacco industry. That's harming children's brains. That's sending people back to smoking, and has a whole range of absurd health effects. So people are hearing this repeatedly from mainstream medical sources, media sources, but not only that. In Australia, and I imagine in South Africa, respected medical organisations are spreading the same misinformation. They're lying about the relative safety of vaping. They're misinforming people, and not always lying, but just misleading people, withholding information, exaggerating certain facts. There's a lot of denial of the science, a lot of junk science, which is being promoted. I think for the average health professional and um, layman who just reads the media, you get the same negative messages over and over again. And it's no surprise that at the end of the day, they assume the most informed, educated people I speak to say, but aren't cigarettes uh, better for you than vapes? I mean, they actually believe it. That's the impression they get from the media. And we know that surveys show there are enormous misperceptions about the relative harms of these products. Our peak health organization um, published a review of vaping several years ago. Now, 7 or 8 of us, including international experts, including Neil Benowitz and Anne McNeil, we prepared a review of their critique of our peak health body's position on vaping, and we concluded that it's not fit for purpose. It was full of scientific errors, misinformation, bias, and it should be rewritten. No one took any notice of that, and that review is their review of the evidence is constantly quoted as and referred to as, oh, but vaping does this and vaping does that, when we've made it very clear that it doesn't. But that was ignored. So when there's a narrative and it's endorsed by the mainstream, the health minister, the peak health bodies, it's very hard to turn that around. And you can come along as Kurt Yeo, or I come along as Colin Mendelsohn, and say, well, hang on, have a look at this information and um, and read these critiques of that information. People are going to be very suspicious. What would I know compared to the Department of Health? I must be wrong. And unless you make a proper study of it, it's very hard for people to turn their opinion around.
No, absolutely. I mean, and it's very concerning because what I understand it is now a loss of curiosity, and
Mm.
that's very harmful because
Mm.
some of the arguments that they put forward, and yes, we're experiencing it right now currently in South Africa, is that the ignorance around vaping and around tobacco harm reduction is in itself is quite alarming. In fact, just recently, our deputy health minister was asked the question of what is his view on tobacco harm reduction, and
Mm.
he made the statement that harm is harm. And the deputy minister is a medical doctor. And I find
Mm.
that rather quite an astounding statement because harm is not harm. Harm is a spectrum. And in,
Yeah.
in terms of how we approach certain things within the medical space, I'm not a doctor, but there is, for example, chemotherapy. chemotherapy is an incredibly harmful approach to dealing
Mm,
with something that's even more harmful and deadly.
mm,
But we will take on something that will assist, but there is harm associated with that. And in fact, I don't know of any medical intervention, whether it be through pharmaceuticals or whether it be through surgery, that doesn't introduce a level of harm. So a statement coming
yeah,
from a medical
yeah,
doctor to just say
yeah,
harm is harm is
yeah. It's
rather
nonsense.
scary.
Nonsense.
It is
Yeah,
absolute
it's nonsense.
nonsense. So,
But can I just jump in and say a couple of things there? We often get this message that vaping is safer than smoking, but it's not safe, which is really misleading. Nothing
absolutely,
is completely safe. I mean, that
absolutely.
is like it's a nonsense and it's a deliberate attempt to confuse people. And there is this double standards for vaping. You know, we apply these ridiculous standards of safety that we require. You know, we need 20 years to 30 years, 40 years to know that vaping is safer than smoking. After 3 months, we adopted COVID vaccines.
Hmm.
We thought, oh, yeah, COVID's a serious condition. We've got to treat this quickly. People are going to die. Let's get these vaccines out there and we'll monitor them to see how safe they are.
But
What's the difference?
I think, then the argument will come back. And again, we've had these debates. The argument come back. There wasn't an emergency situation. That was a once in a generation or once in a multiple generation event. But then I use the Ozempic approach. Ozempic, the first time they started testing semaglutide was in 2002. And it was in 2012 when the pharmaceutical companies looked at using this particular compound or chemical in an
Mm,
injection or injectable. From 2012 to 2017 was when it was finally approved by the FDA. And now it's just
mm,
absolutely everywhere. And I know recently, not so long ago, the Australian Health Department issued out guidance to say, please stop over prescribing
mm,
this because there's such a demand for the product, but the
yeah,
supply is so. And that's a 5 year from development to final approval for a drug that is aimed at dealing with incredibly chronic disease, type 2 diabetes. And now it's been used for obesity treatment. And that's 5 years.
mm,
Where's the 20, 30 years on a drug that's going
yeah.
to be used for a
And
a lifetime?
more people die from smoking every year than died altogether from vaping, from COVID,
Yes,
for example, and
absolutely.
certainly more than die from obesity. So, I mean, this is a crisis. This is a crisis. People are dying. 8 million people are dying every year. That's a health crisis, and it needs urgent treatment. And that makes me angry that we're happy to let those people die when we have solutions.
And I think that's where another hard line that I've always said is that I believe that people that smoke and now that people who vape are deemed as second class citizens because
Mm,
it's more about,
yeah,
this the stigma that's been attached to smokers that was being so cleverly architected over the
yeah,
years, and this ostracizing of smokers. You go stand on that side of of the parking lot.
mm,
You're not allowed here. You're not allowed there. You smell. You stink, and so forth. So we've built this picture of what a
mm,
smoker is, and therefore they don't deserve the same
yeah,
level of care, treatment, empathy
yeah,
as what we
yeah,
would deal with. And this is a very
yeah,
similar kind of discussions and similar kind of a feeling for me when we were dealing with HIV and AIDS. How these
yeah,
people are they're dirty, they're filthy, their
mm,
practices have caused this, and therefore they should
mm.
suffer.
It's
And
their
that
own fault.
it's their own fault, and that's what I feel what's happening here. And I find it, they just ignore the fact that, as you correctly said, 8 million individuals around the world die annually,
Yeah,
annually,
yeah,
and it's not
yeah.
getting any better.
And I think the crux of the matter, which you've mentioned, is this difference in value between a child's health and an adult's health. So what we're doing is we're giving this priority to small and potential effects in young people, which we're wildly exaggerating, when there are millions of adults who are at short-term and serious risk of serious health harm. It's like we're saying, well, one child getting a temporary cough is more important than an adult getting a lung cancer. Some people, and that's what the respiratory physicians and the pediatricians say, well, one child getting sick is too many. No, that's not right. When you public health decisions need to look at the overall impact, the net impact of a public health intervention. Nothing's completely safe. Everything will have some harm, but by far there's a greater benefit from treating adults compared to the small harm and potential harm from these products getting into the hands of young people. And the way to prevent them getting into the hands of young people is not to ban them, but that's what we unfortunately are doing in Australia virtually and in South Africa.
Yeah, I mean, my wife's a pediatrician. I have a son. And I always ask the question is, what about the children of people who smoke? What about the children of grandparents that smoke? I look at my son and I see how much he has lost in terms of those connections with his grandparents and with his uncles and or great uncles and aunts who had all passed away before he was born
Yeah,
from smoking related diseases. What about those?
yeah,
Don't they deserve to have
yeah.
their family and loved ones living a safer and a healthier lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, it's more than that. It's also, if your parents smoke, you're using the enormous part of the family budget to buy cigarettes. You're getting secondhand smoke as a child in that family.
But
You've got a role model, smoking role model in the family. I mean, it's good for the kids if the parents stop, and the most effective way to stop, we know, is vaping.
absolutely. So you've put all of these thoughts and all your learnings in a wonderful book, which I encourage anybody that is interested in this particular topic, as well as people that wanting to quit smoking. Stop Smoking, Start Vaping was a book written by Dr. Colin Mendelsohn. Doc, when was this book published? It was a couple of years ago.
A couple of years
Yeah,
ago, yeah,
and
yeah,
unfortunately, I didn't have it on copy or hard print. I downloaded it. It's not available in the country in terms of a printed version. I downloaded it on my Kindle. Fantastic read, well worth for anybody out there that is interested in this particular topic, as well as people that are wanting to quit smoking. So thank you very much for that book.
yeah.
I'm I'm going to touch on something now that I know that was in our last conversation in Warsaw was a point of embarrassment with regards to the situation in Australia and how
Mm,
Australia is dealing with this. And I
mm,
think, in my view, Australia is now becoming almost like the litmus test, almost like Frankenstein's monster in terms of an approach to tobacco harm reduction. And
mm,
unfortunately,
mm,
it's they've ignored all the advice as well as the predictions that have been made not only by yourself but numerous experts around the world. When will it end? When do you think it will end based on this
yeah, I think
experiment?
one of the yeah one of the issues is that we have a group of tobacco control experts who have too much influence. So they have the ear of the minister, and they've had some success in the past with other measures, agreed, but on this they're wrong. And on this, they're determined to force their policy through. And they've got the ear of the minister. The minister believes what they say, sprouts their lies repeatedly, and that's a big problem in Australia. When will it finish? Look, at the end of the day, it's a political decision. Um, the main party in office, the Labor Party, is opposed to vaping. To them, vaping is a public health menace. It's addicting a new generation of children. It's a tobacco company ploy. It's nonsense. But the other parties are increasingly understanding the real issues. So our other major party, the Liberal National Coalition, is now in favour of sensible regulation. Our policy, which is retail sales from licensed retail vendors to adults, with a growing number of independent members of Parliament who are in favour of sensible regulation. I think if at the next election, which is due in May, I think if the Labor Party is voted out, which at this stage we're not sure that will happen, then I think we could expect to see reasonable vaping policy introduced. I think this will have to be reversed because it's not working. We've got a model that's tantamount to prohibition. We've said to smokers, if you want to vape, you have to either go to a doctor and get a script, or you go to a pharmacy and you can get certain low strength products there. It's just not working. So at the last count, about 8% of vapers had a prescription. Very few pharmacists will stock these products. They've been told that they're very angry that these products were forced upon them. They had no role in the decision making. The minister just said, well, we're going to get the pharmacists to sell these products, but they're not approved products. They're not on our register of approved medical goods. So they're selling products that they don't regard as safe. And they're very misinformed about vaping. But the bottom line is that doctors won't prescribe, the pharmacists won't dispense, and the patients say, why do we have to go to a pharmacist and a doctor to get a vape, which is 95% safer than a cigarette, which you can buy at any corner store? So it's just not working. So the natural outcome of that is we have a huge black market. Over 90% of the products supplied in Australia are supplied by criminal gangs. They're unregulated, they're sold freely to children, and there's a turf war between these criminal gangs. It's a disaster. But you'd think that would be so obvious to everyone, but the tobacco control experts who advise the ministers are saying, well, now we're cracking down on this, we're going to solve this problem, because that always works for prohibition. No, it doesn't. It never works. And it's not going to work in this model. And it'll only work once we eliminate this model with a sensible retail consumer model.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's the exact same situation that happened in 2020 in South Africa, where the complete sales ban of tobacco and vaping as well as alcohol. And a lot of people that were in the space that I think that's where the problem lies, is that they don't listen to the people that are on the streets, walking the ground, are involved deeply into these spaces, how fragile these decisions or how these decisions can have such an impact on a very fluid and dynamic environment like tobacco. And literally, a lot of people believe that 2020 ban was the catalyst for an illicit market in South Africa. But the reality is, where it started from was going back as far as 2009, and that incremental increase of excise on these products eventually got to a tipping point where it became too expensive for people, and it created a market for illicit products. And
Yeah.
and you think, there is so much in the literature around what prohibition and the impact of prohibition has had on society, not only during that time, but then post prohibition, the 1920s alcohol prohibition. There's so much literature around that. And then we have very recent experiments like South Africa, which is a completely harebrained approach to it. I mean, you're locking people away in their houses for weeks or months on end. The anxiety goes through the roof. People are genuinely, going to use cigarettes and alcohol and so forth more. And then you tell them, no, that's not going to happen, purely because we want to keep the beds free from anything other than COVID. And suddenly there's a black market, that's an illicit market, that just explodes, and now there's no way to control it. It's gone. The horse is bolted, and now how much effort and how much cost will be needed to now try to reel that back? And as you said, it's rather devastating. My heart
And
bleeds.
it's totally predictable too,
Absolutely.
Kurt. I mean, this is no surprise. Why do we have to learn this the hard way every time? Why can't we look at history and say, well, we know this doesn't work. Let's do something different. Let's look at what actually works, because this doesn't, and it's never worked.
Because I think a lot of the medicals, the researchers out there, the tobacco control specialists, the individuals that have the ear of the Department of Health, or the lawmakers or decision makers over there, actually make their calls on spreadsheets, based on algorithms, but it's not based on actually walking the streets, actually interviewing and dealing with people at the ground to understand how this could turn in a different direction rapidly with far greater impact to society. So I really hope that in May, or even during that in May in Australia that there is some kind of sensibility that brings or is brought back into Australia's politics as a whole, because I think there is a lot of
Mm.
a lot of misinformation and misguidance that's happening there. But the same is applying in South Africa. I mean, and now we're seeing, for example, the UK, which is absolutely
Mm.
absurd. That's what's happening in the
Mm.
UK. We thought it was solved. We thought this is the panacea. This is
Yeah.
this is the go-to model. Yeah, it is. And now
Yeah.
it's falling apart at
Yeah.
its seams.
There's pushback in lots of countries that have made good progress. I mean, even in New Zealand, which has had remarkable success, there's ratbags in New Zealand who are saying, "Well, this is the wrong model. We've got some kids vaping, and um, there are kids using disposable products. We've got to do something about this." Even though the adults are stopping at an incredible rate, it's happening in Canada. There's pushback. We've got to stop the flavors because the kids are vaping, and the nonsense in the UK. I mean, it's going to be an ongoing battle for a long time. Even if you make positive steps, you're going to have to deal with the pushback. Then there's the next battle and the next battle. So it's going to take a long time to get this fully accepted. And we'll look back in 20 years' time and we'll say, well, this seems to be working really well. Why didn't we do this earlier? And that's what happens with harm reduction options like this, innovative harm reduction treatments, whether it's been treatment of drug use with heroin injection rooms, needle exchanges, things like seatbelts. There's always hostile opposition when they are introduced, and then people fight them, and eventually, we realize they work, they save money, they save lives, and we look back and say, well, that was good. How come we left it so long? And we'll be doing that with vaping, and there'll be a lot of people will be drawn to account, I think, in time. They'll have to take responsibility. People who are in respected positions now who are making the wrong decision and aren't willing to admit that they're wrong, they'll be brought to account later on down the track.
Do you really think
Because
so?
I'm quite sure this will. I'm quite sure this will prevail. Harm reduction has to prevail. The evidence is overwhelming, and you just have to look at the evidence to understand that. A lot of people aren't willing to, but the evidence is overwhelming. We look at the difference between Australia and New Zealand. They've embraced tobacco harm reduction in New Zealand, and over the last 5 years, they've halved their smoking rate. Their smoking rate's fallen twice as fast as it is in Australia. They don't have a black market. Why would you go to the black market when you can buy from legal consumer outlets? Yes, they've got an issue with youth vaping, but it's mainly been a problem before the regulation. The youth vaping went up. Now it's leveled out since regulation. It's just a very successful model. The quit rates in the low socioeconomic groups and the Indigenous people, the Maori people, have fallen dramatically, much faster than they ever had before. It's got so much going for it. But in Australia, we're seeing the exact
Yeah.
opposite. We're seeing very, very slow rates of smoking reduction in the disadvantaged groups, in our Indigenous population, and generally in the general population. And we've got this huge crime problem related to the black markets.
Well, I read somewhere, and I'm not quite sure how true it is that we've seen it. I think someone quoted over 100,000 Australians are now gone back to smoking.
Yeah, I don't think we have the numbers for that, but we know anecdotally a lot of people are saying, "Oh, this is just too hard. I'm not doing this." You can't get good help with vaping. There are very few doctors that will give advice on that. People don't know how to do it or where to go. I mean, my book will tell you,
Hmm.
but that's got limited access. But people people can't get the information, and they say, why do I have to jump through hoops to get a product that's safer? I may as well just go to the corner shop next door and just hand over my money, and I got my cigarettes. Like getting 24/7, and it's just so easy.
No, absolutely, and it's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking
Mm,
because, and
it
I've
is.
never understood is that when survey after survey after survey will indicate that when people get to a certain age or a number of years of smoking, there is this desire, this deep desire, and of
Mm,
wanting to quit smoking. And in our recent surveys, it's basically indicated that almost 70% of the smokers that they
mm,
had interviewed had a desire to quit, and many of them
yeah,
have attempted to quit. And yet,
yeah,
we have something that could be added to that toolkit, as you said, and
mm,
provide them with that
mm,
opportunity. And I don't know, maybe I'm too idealistic, and is to say,
mm,
jump at it. We've got something that is not only proving to be less harmful, but proving to be successful, but it's also enjoyable. And
yeah,
if it reaches that goal, why aren't we curious around this? Why aren't we investigating it? Why aren't we exploring it and trying to understand what makes it work? We've just literally said, ignore it. It's harmful. It comes from a dark place. Move on.
yeah. But the other interesting aspect is that it doesn't matter how successful a treatment is. If Champix works or counselling and nicotine works, that's all very well. But if no one uses them, it doesn't matter. What's most popular is vaping. Vaping in Australia is by far the most popular quitting method. And you'll get the best public health impact from a product that's A, successful, and B, is widely used. And when you multiply the benefits of those two things, the public health opportunity from vaping is far greater than from all the other treatments. It works better than them, and more people want to use it.
100%. Dr. Colin Mendelsohn, it was an absolute honor and a privilege to meet you, to read some of the most impeccable stuff that you've put out there, listen to you talk, give numerous talks. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, what you have done for this community, and the strength and that you have, and the bravery that you've had to endure through some of the most horrendous attacks on you personally, your character, and you've just steamed along through it, and just
Mm.
kept going at it because you knew how important, or still know how important this is.
Mm.
I thank you. I know many people out there thank you too. And more importantly, I thank you for coming on my show and spending some time
Mhm.
to share this. Where to now,
It's been
Doc?
my pleasure. Could I just say? Could I just say that 10 years is enough for me. I mean, I'm not invincible. The constant undermining and smearing does take an effect, and it's an uphill battle for sure. But I know we're going to win this. I just want to say one last thing. If I can just mention my website, I've got an FAQ on my website, which has about 65, 70 questions, the common things about vaping answered in detail, and they're evidence based and up to date. So if people do want facts and information, if someone says, "Oh, but that causes popcorn lung," you can go to my website and look up popcorn lung, and
I've
you'll get the facts
I've,
about
I've
that.
actually got your website on your name tag on yeah.
Okay,
So yes, I'll definitely
okay,
create a link onto it. I'll have a link to your
yeah,
book, and the link to your website. And yes, it is a wealth of information there. Encourage everybody out there to uh, download Dr. Conor Mendelssohn's book, purchase it on either Kindle or even a hard copy if you can get it there, and look at Dr. Colin Mendelssohn's work and and information that he has put out there. Very important for people just to get the facts. So, Doc, where to now? Retirement, rugby.
Well, I've retired. It's still a work in progress, but I've had a shoulder reconstruction and a knee replacement in the last 9 months. So, I'm getting myself back in shape, doing some gardening, spending more time with the grandchildren, getting back into sport. There's lots of things I've wanted to do. I've never had time to do, like clean the garage, uh, hit the family tree, and all that sort of thing. There's plenty to keep me busy. I'm sure I'll be entertained. I'll
Absolutely.
be keeping an eye on this field, but yeah, I definitely won't be relapsing for a third time.
No, no, please don't. I think it's well deserved. I think you enjoy all of that. I think it's fantastic, and Well, thanks again, Doc.
Pleasure.
Yeah, enjoy it. Absolutely enjoy it.
Thank-
We'll take it
Thanks,
from
Colin.
here. Thank you for giving us such a strong foundation.
Thank you for asking me, and keep up the good work.
So there we go, everybody. The fantastic Colin Mendelsohn. I absolutely encourage everybody to download the Doc's book. Go to his website. There will be a link in the bottom of this video to both of those. Yes, I think it's very important that we stay curious around this and we keep sharing, the truth around tobacco harm reduction and the importance of these products. As once again, if you are interested in coming onto the show, please reach out to me at info@vsml.co.za. And more importantly, if you are a person that smoked and now vaped and you have a good story to tell, please go to our website. I'll put the link in the bottom of this video to our testimonial page. Upload a testimonial. Share your story. It could be very, very important for someone to view it and have give them that spark to make that choice. So thank you, everybody. And until next time, cheers.